Good evening. I'm Russell Hancock. I have the great privilege of serving as the bishop of the Palo Alto Foothills Ward. And so in that capacity, I welcome you tonight to our fireside. Fireside, does everybody know that term? Is there anybody here that's visiting a Latter-day Saint chapel for the first time? Maybe not. Oh, maybe. Well, in the good old days, people would gather around a fire in the evening, and they would tell stories. They would share testimony. They would share faith that way. And the title has stuck. And so we just keep calling these firesides, even though we don't have a fire here this evening. But we're here to do that very thing. And in this case, to hear from Todd and Andrea Miner, and they're going to share experiences from the past 3 years that they spent in Cameroon. Todd and Andrea don't need an introduction. You know them and you love them. But I'm just going to review the facts, the basic facts. They met across the bay at Cal when they were students there. You'll get a kick out of this. My ties are to Stanford. So Todd and I had this running thing every year at the big game. We would, there would be a wager between us, sometimes real stakes involved. And, the loser had to wear the tie to church with the other, with the winner's colors. Yeah. And whenever he would win, not only he would wear the tie, but he would bring all three of his boys wearing the school colors just to rub it in. Yeah. So I don't know if you're aware, but Stanford is in a bad patch these days. And that darn Todd, I don't know how he did it, but he still followed Cal football in Cameroon and texted me with these obnoxious messages about his football team. Anyway, they found their way eventually to the bay, to this side of the bay. We're so grateful for that. They did a long stint in the Redwood City Ward in our stake, and then found their way to Palo Alto Foothills Ward. And before departing for Cameroon, they were serving as the bishop of this ward, and they're just very, very beloved figures. They've been doing arduous things for the last 3 years, and we're really anxious to hear about it. So thank you for being here. They no longer live here, which is tragic as far as we're concerned, but they've accepted a set of responsibilities for the church in Salt Lake, and so they'll be there for a period of time. But we're still holding out hope that they'll return to the house here on Montrose, right here. I think it's appropriate for us to pray in that way. Here they are, Todd, Andrea Miner, freshly returned from Cameroon.
So we wanted just to start off just giving you some context of the area. We wanted to talk about Africa a little bit. Sometimes when people think about Africa, sometimes they think it's a country. But it's actually not a monolithic continent. It's a very large continent. In fact, if you were to take the other countries, I'm not sure if you can see all that, United States fits right up there in Western Africa. We were down there in the central area. We'll get to, China fits in. You see India over there, Eastern Europe, France. Africa is huge. And Africa is not a monolithic culture. Sometimes people say, oh, the Africans this, but every culture, every tribe, every country is a little bit different. So we're going to tell you a little more about Cameroon and Gabon. Just a little more about that. We were in Central Africa, so sub-Saharan. So the Sahara's up here somewhere. We were in Cameroon, so we were in Central Africa. And as we're part of a new area, this was a screen grab that I had, so it's a little fuzzy. But the church, as you know, is divided up into areas, I think since 1984. So the church divides up the world into areas. And the church created a new Africa Central area to be launched in 2020, August 1st, 2020. And with that, there was a couple of missions in that area. So the Ethiopia mission and the Cameroon Yaoundé mission.
And the Tanzania mission were all new.
Oh, okay, yeah, all new. So these were some of the countries. So this is what the Africa Central area looks like now, in case you're curious. This is so announced in June 2019. It was actually split off from the Southeast area and the Africa South area. So as I was mentioning, it's the first new area that the church created in 30 years. And we started with 10 missions, now has 12 missions.
This picture we put in, it was our first in-person. So we left in 2020, which was full COVID, which was a little bit stressful. But finally, after about a year or so, we were able to meet in person every 6 months to have what is called a mission leader seminar. So all of the mission leaders from the missions in the Africa Central area got together. On the far right, you'll see Matt and Shelley Carpenter, who used to live here in Palo Alto.
Also on Montrose.
On Montrose, right? And then in the center, there's a gentleman, the tallest man in the center. That's Joseph Satati. So he was the Africa Central president. He was the president of the Africa Central area, and Matt Carpenter was one of his counselors. And on the far left is Thierry Mutombo and his wife, and Elder Sitati and his wife Gladys in front of him in kind of the pink suit. They are from Kenya, and they joined the church as a new married couple. And they were fantastic mentors to us. They helped us understand so many important lessons about the culture and just gave us great lessons that we could pass on to our young missionaries who were, a lot of them were from Africa also. And then on the far left is Thierry Mutombo and his wife, and they are from the Democratic Republic of Congo. You'll notice that all the other people are mission leader couples, and you notice that the church is really attempting to have more local leaders serve in these callings.
You may have seen in the church news, starting August, Elder Mutombo will be the president of the Africa Central area.
Mm-hmm.
So this was our area. So the Cameroon Yaoundé Mission is actually 4 countries: Cameroon, Gabon, the Central African Republic, and Equatorial Guinea. And so it's located right there at the kind of the hinge point in Africa. I left this up. This was another slide we'd used. Our focus was really to help our missionaries become lifelong disciples of Jesus Christ. You might think it's to have a lot of baptisms or support the church, and all those things are important, but really, as the missionary department told us, is to help our missionaries be lifelong disciples of Jesus Christ. So all the instruction that we gave, the mentoring, hopefully the modeling, of course they needed to go out and work, and baptisms would come as part of that, but it's really to help them to follow Jesus Christ. And actually, I don't think we were released from that part. We're talking to missionaries every single day, return missionaries. Just some more information about the countries. Whose flag is that? That's Cameroon. Yeah. That's right. Okay, some fun facts. 28 million people. It is technically bilingual, French and English, but they have like 250 more, all these different ethnicities, lots of languages. But French is kind of the lingua franca. We'll get more into the history if you want about English. There's a Anglophone crisis going on right now, but it's majority French. It started out as a German protectorate, then became a French colony until 1960, when many of these other countries were independent. They have the oldest leader in the world. After Queen Elizabeth died, Paul Biya, 91 years old. Now, we're not opposed to old leaders, but they have a very old one. Also, you might know them, they're big in soccer, and they're about the size of California.
So think of the north part of Cameroon. You saw it's sort of you saw that it's a long country. The top has a little bit of Sahara Desert in it. It is also, unfortunately, there are people from Boko Haram who operate up there, and just the other day, some people were killed there. So Todd and I really stayed in just the 2 cities that were a port city and then the political capital, which is called Yaoundé. On the west side, there's a civil war going on between the Anglophones and the Francophones. And then on the east side of the country, it borders up with Central African Republic. And maybe some of you know about Central African Republic, but there's just a lot of fighting going on there. So we really were confined. We had a very urban mission experience. So the pictures you will see that are urban, except for when we did occasionally have to take a 5-hour drive between our 2 cities in Cameroon. And then we got to see what the countryside really would look like if the cities weren't there, which is absolute jungle. Green like you have never seen before. So
that's a little foreshadowing of some slides.
Yeah.
Which flag is this? It's Gabon. Okay, Gabon, you'll know this after. 2.5 million people. It's a lot smaller than Cameroon. It's it's all French. It's a former French colony, also liberated in 1960 or had their independence. That was something we could bond over. We said, hey, we were colonized also. Um, it's an oil producing country, and so they were relatively wealthy. The oil production has gone down a little bit, so they haven't actually exploited, as they call it, a lot of their agriculture. So they import a lot, but it is more wealthy. More people are employed there. You might have read it in the news. They just had a coup d'état. Instead of having the oldest leader there, they had a family that was kind of a dynasty, and people were fed up with it, and so it's now kind of a military junta as they're figuring out a transitional government.
It was not bloody though.
No.
The citizens were happy in the streets.
Very
There
happy.
was no problem.
And Gabon, they're big in ecology. A lot of great forests. We did see some forest elephants there. They're about the size of Colorado. That is Central African Republic. Yeah, who would know? 5.5 million people. They're also French, another French colony, plus Sango. Lots of natural resources. And because of some of the fighting, you might have heard of the Wagner Group. They're there in force. They're protecting it and also getting some of the natural resources. The UN has been trying to keep the peace there since 2014. It's the size of Texas. We were not allowed to go into that country, but we did have, there was a branch there, used to be two. It got consolidated because of some membership things. A lot of returned missionaries there though, and they're just really desperately poor. It's hard to communicate with them because the internet goes down a lot, but good people there. And then finally, Equatorial Guinea. That's 1.7 million people. We actually never went there. It is a Spanish-speaking country because it was a former Spain colony. They also claim officially French and Portuguese, but they really speak Spanish. They were liberated in 1968. They have the longest serving leader in the world since 1979. So we've got a lot of top countries in ours. It's the size of Hawaii. So that's a little bit of our countries.
So we really traveled always just between Cameroon and Gabon, but Todd had a lot of ecclesiastical responsibilities for Central African Republic. And when people needed to go there, his counselors who were Africans went there. There's a State Department warnings and things like that. You just don't go there. We did not go there.
So I'd have to do missionary interviews over WhatsApp, or when we came home, like releasing them, over WhatsApp. WhatsApp is big there. So anyway, when we received our call, we looked up Cameroon on the internet. We're like, Cameroon, look at that. Looks like Tahiti. That's like, and I'm sure that those places exist. We got there and it was more like this. And you can see here, there's people outside selling. This guy's selling popcorn. You've got multiple people on a motorcycle here. You've got people selling their, moto taxis. Yeah. There are people who just lay a sheet out and they're selling their wares. There's people walking with a bunch of buckets on their head. This is one of their markets. And so there's, dirt roads. People are pulling wheelbarrows. Wheelbarrows are very popular there. We'll just go through some of these things quickly. We'll be open for questions afterwards. When we landed, it was, of course, full COVID.
And we're still not really sure how we got a visa because all the missionaries essentially had been pulled out all over the world. You all know that, and brought home. We had 14 missionaries who were Africans who somehow got stuck in the country, and we're not sure how that happened. And then somehow we got a visa. We're not sure how that happened, but we got a visa. So that's why we were allowed to go in, even though we had other U.S. missionaries who were called to come to serve with us, and they couldn't get a visa. So we're not sure about that.
Well, chalk it up as a miracle, but it may have been some government finagling, but it all worked out. And we were there, and we were greeted, because no one really knew what to do with COVID, by this person in a jumpsuit who sprayed us down with some sort of liquid. We weren't sure what it was, so we were in a long line for that. Then, of course, we have to get processed every time we fly, and we were flying every 6 weeks. We were doing COVID tests. Cameron was doing COVID tests even when everyone else had stopped. We think they had a bunch of stockpiles that they'd received, and
Cameroon has a tight relationship with the U.S. CDC.
Yep.
And so they had a lot of supplies.
And so they would test us. They wouldn't really look at the results afterwards, but we had to go through the tests. And then we had to get processed, to get our cards. I just like the juxtaposition of Andrea's smiling face and the people who were probably tired of working there. I think one of my favorite things, I'm not sure if you can see it, but in Cameroon, they've got bats, lots of bats.
I mean, big bats,
They're not that big.
Oh.
They were at least this. I mean, they were like seagull size. They're not like, little teeny fruit bats. mean, they probably eat fruit, but it looked like a Batman movie, and they're just fluttering everywhere. It was really cool. We have a video of that, but anyway, that is a little bit of the context of the countries. We'll talk just briefly about government. We touched upon that a little bit. This is President Paul Biya. I think he'd been serving in the government with his uncle, and then somehow he took over in 1984, and his uncle kind of moved out. Since 1960, since their independence, Cameroon's only had 2 presidents. The first one, 1960 to 83, I think it was, and then Paul Biya since then. Paul Biya's wife enjoys being with him and loves life, and here's them with the Obamas and also with the Bidens. So they get out. Something interesting. This is we first showed up at like a bakery next to a grocery store. I don't know if you can see on their clothing, but that's Paul Biya on the clothing. So I think this is a great thing that our politicians should do. They would give cloth out, bolts of cloth with their face on it. And of course, since he's been a leader so long, his tagline is the force of experience. And so you'll see Paul Biya's face, the force of experience, and people will just take the cloth and they're very good at sewing. And so they'll make dresses and shirts and pants. And our missionaries sometimes had ties. We said, no, don't do anything political. But like that cloth is everywhere. Even when we had someone show up, they got a Paul Biya outfit. So Paul Biya is everywhere. Infrastructure. This is what I noticed a lot, maybe coming from a world where we try to establish solid infrastructure. Cameroon didn't have much of that at all. I mean, everything that you would think would be or should be stable or would be in a Western country, they didn't have it.
This is when we first arrived, the church had some apartments. We had some missionaries already in the country. And then we had apartments that were empty because of COVID. And then some of our apartments had been shut down. So we had to figure out how to pay the electrical bills and the water bills. And there was a member who was trying to help us. And so we had to go to the electric company and wait in line. So we were given number 23 to wait, but we've been given number 242 also, just so you know. I mean, and so you sit there and wait, and then like the power would go out at the electric company, so they couldn't process the payments. And I mean, we laugh, but the thing is, it's like, oh my goodness, it is so hard to live like that. If this is your everyday experience, we felt lucky to get 1 or 2 things accomplished in a day because we would sit there for hours and wait. And then you start building relationships with people. And then we because it's all cash, everything's cash based. And then we were try to be persistent and say, hey, could we write you a check? The church wants us to do electronic payments for everything. We learned about how to pay bills and stuff because we didn't have the senior couples to help us. But then we made a relationship with a woman at the electric company who we finally convinced her that our check would be good.
This is one of the themes. Having relationships really helps because it's how work gets done. I mean, there was no bribes or anything, but we were just friendly. And so we would know to talk to this person, and she would stamp our check, then we could walk it over to the kiosk, and then they would accept it, sometimes looking at it. But
and then we'd try eventually to send our young missionaries there who we conscripted to work in the office, see if it would work for them to go deliver the check. So we're trying to free ourselves up gradually as time went by. That took a year or something like that. But this is just the daily life. You sit and wait. And somebody had told us that if actually the prior mission leaders who covered that area told us that. They said, if you're not patient people, you will become patient. And I remember thinking, I'm pretty patient, I'm pretty patient, but this is a whole different level of patience, so. And
you can see why the electricity goes out intermittently, because this is the kind of cable management that they have. We had in one of our landlords, they switched some code or whatever, and our payments didn't go through or whatever. We were trying to find the meter
for our apartment.
And so we were looking in,
and they sent us into this.
Yeah, we were trying to find it, and so it's hard. Things are hard. I took a picture of this. This is our car parked. And you got to be careful of the power lines because power lines. So it's kind of dangerous. I don't want to scare anyone for doing a mission.
And if it makes you feel good, the church has a lot of training videos for the young missionaries that are very entertaining, that teach them about electrical safety. And so,
Yeah, but you just have to be keep your wits about you. So people there in general don't have cars, and so they're always having to pay for taxis, and moto taxis are cheaper. So you'll see a lot of people who have a motorcycle and they'll just take you places. That was not allowed for our missionaries, but they're everywhere, and they're more efficient. Also, you could just see pretty much anything driving around. We one time we heard as we were driving, like someone, it sounded like they were screaming. It was like, I looked, and on a motorcycle there was tied down like 3 live pigs on a
like
motorcycle.
potbelly pigs,
Yeah.
not baby pigs.
And so
Baby pigs,
here's
so.
some people just sitting in the back of a truck. But once you understand that, it's very liberating. You're like, I can do anything, and it's really fun. In fact, there's this phrase that says "L'impossible n'est pas camerounais," which means impossible is not Cameroonian, which is yeah, they can do.
This
lot of
is a
things.
photo we took before Eid. So there's a nice relationship between the Christians and Muslims in these countries where we lived. So there was no problem. And so these are just a lot of goats.
Mhm. This was this was more a Muslim neighborhood. Sometimes you'll see cows, and so with this infrastructure, everything kind of piles up. When people are late to a meeting, it could be generally because there were cows in the road, or the power had gone out, or the road was washed away, or the president had closed down the roads. I mean, it's really hard, and you think of how that just compounds, which increases the cost. Plus, there's not a postal service, so you can't really mail. They don't have addresses, and so our address really for our office was across the street from the big hospital, and in the same building with Ethiopian Airlines is, how
On
you
the third
describe it.
floor on the left.
So
that was how it was. So
it was hard. And also there's rains, and it's not that there's just terrible rains, but there's not the mechanism to evacuate the water, and so it would build up. And we got there. This is the first couple of months, and it really caused problems. I think it washed away like 900 homes. This was actually from the district office in Douala. We were just watching people. We were waiting for people to come to zone conference.
we were waiting for
Where's everybody?
missionaries to come to zone conference, and 2 hours later, everybody made it. Well, they made it because they waited for the water to subside. And I think maybe we have some pictures. Do you
I
have
think it's
pictures?
later on in the
Okay,
mission.
yeah, it's just a challenge. It's a challenge.
So people walk a lot, and it was so cute to see the kids and the babies, and
People dress in traditional fabrics or in very contemporary clothing in our particular countries,
Yeah.
right?
they could be
So-
very dressed up, very very fancy. This is just another example of a road. You can see here the gutters are really kind of an open trench, and sometimes they'll cover it over. And anyway, that's just what a road looks like. As we were driving between Yaoundé and Douala to visit our city, because we got there was no airplanes running. Everything was shut down, and we would drive. And this is where we had the highwaymen who would show up and try to make sure we had our extinguisher and our triangle and our vet. Like there's all these little rules, and if we missed one, then we'd have to pay money.
But we were prepared. We didn't miss anything.
No.
But instead they would tell us, oh, well, we saw you speeding. We saw you speeding. And so then they'd pull you over, and then, you'd roll down your window, and then they'd say, give me the registration for your car and your passport. And then they'd say, we saw you speeding. And so, here, we'll write you up a ticket or take you off to the police station in the middle of the jungle or something. And, or you can just pay us this amount. And we were not supposed to pay bribes. And so it became just a time for us to take turns trying to get out of that situation. So sometimes our badge that said the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was very effective. There are still many, many people who believe in Jesus and understand the power of him in their lives and his goodness. And then there are other people who, one person said, I'm an animist, and so he didn't really care about that. But time after time, we would find a solution, whether it was, I say, well, I can give you some bottles of water, or, But mostly we would try and have a conversation. And sometimes the conversations would start out and they'd be yelling at us. And which was a little stressful to me because I'm not used to people yelling at me like that. I didn't grow up in a house like that. And Todd doesn't yell. But we would just kind of take turns trying to come up with different points of conversation, or then we would kind of make some friends occasionally. And one time I thought we were really stuck on the side of the road, like we were at an impasse. And then some man walked up just out of the blue and he said, "Oh, my friends, I know them. They're fine. Let them go," like that. So every time there was some sort of solution, which of course was an important message for us. Yeah.
And we saw the hand of the Lord in it. We really did hand out a lot of brochures, and we'd get names of people to pass along to the missionaries through this. They saw our badge, and most of the people would respect that. So it was, we felt great protection by having the name of Jesus on us. But it's a pretty lush countryside, and they have huge logging. This is, example of some of the trees that they're cutting down. And these are the logging trucks that are going back and forth on this road that you want to avoid. And the roads are not always such that you can stay in your lane, and some cars don't have lights, and it's a little bit crazy. Or you'd be dragging rebar as you're driving. But and then I learned new ways of packing too. You never would think that you've packed your car enough. You think you've really done it, but they take it to new levels. We actually saw a goat on top of one of the cars, live goat. So it was lots of fun. But with all this, they're still kids. They're having fun, and people are happy, and people are good.
And so kind. So kind.
Here's back on the infrastructure. This was one of the fonts in our one of the chapels. I think the oldest chapel there in Yaoundé, the Bastos Chapel. And the water was out, and so the missionaries have to go and take buckets and fill it up. And so that's just what you do. And the missionaries are happy about it. They're just used to doing it, and it's great. And the water goes out, and so this was an example of some of the containers that we would tell them to have in their apartments. So in case the water goes out, they have something to drink and something to wash.
We were in charge of locating apartments for our missionaries, and then writing the or kind of coming to an agreement about an official contract. And so we spent a great deal of time doing that. And often, oh yes, there's water. Oh yes, there's electricity, and it might be running for that day. But this was a problem apartment where really we ended up having to use a lot of water, because you would have to pay a year's worth of rent up front plus 3 more months of deposit if you wanted to move into apartment. That was just sort of the rules that we learned to live by. So
I'm not sure if you can tell from this, but this is actually slabs on the ceiling, and there's some bolts, and you see some of the plaster. And people talk about, and the ceiling fell down on us. And actually the ceiling did fall down in one of our apartments, and it just crumbled because it kind of a plaster ceiling, and some places are really humid. But those are some of the things that we need to deal with. And not the least of it is the technology. I was kind of the technology in chief person there, trying to help them with their phones. This was a satellite phone that we had just in case things got really dicey, but it all worked out. So that was some photos about infrastructure.
the history of the church in Cameroon is kind of interesting. There have been members of the church in Cameroon since the late 80s. There was an initial Cameroon Yaoundé Mission created in 92, but it didn't last. The church tries to be legal in every country where they go, and there were having problems getting it officially recognized. They had hired a local attorney to try and get the church officially recognized there, and nothing was happening.
So since the church was not officially recognized, the mission, the first Cameroon Yaoundé mission, moved, less than a year later into the Ivory Coast. And since then, even though the church had been in Cameroon officially, it had kind of been tossed around between the different missions. And so from 93 to 2005, it was part of the Ivory Coast, Abidjan mission. And then it became part of the Ghana Cape Coast mission. And then it was part of the DRC Kinshasa mission. And then it was most recently of the Congo Brazzaville mission. And then Congo Brazzaville became its own mission. And in 2020, then we inherited Cameroon and Gabon and Central Republic and Equatorial Guinea. So the growth had kind of grown, but not huge, probably because of lack of attention. The leadership needed to be trained, but it had grown, and we got there. There was probably 2,500 members there. There were no stakes in the whole mission. So there were 2 districts, one district for Yaoundé and one district for Douala. And then in Gabon, they had a couple of branches, and in Central African Republic, they had a branch. And so that means all of it kind of flowed up to me, but we are establishing, or we helped establish, I think, the foundation. So we'll have a stake this year in Yaoundé. The first branch was created in the early 90s in Bastos, which was the fanciest part, which is where we lived. And then Douala, first branch, was created in 2004. So Cameroon was dedicated. I'm not sure exactly what was done beforehand, but it was officially dedicated by Elder Holland in 2009. This is what I got off of the internet. But he went with some local church members in August of 2009 to an area overlooking Yaoundé, and he talked about the Daniel and the stone being cut out of the mountain without hands, and talked about in his dedicatory blessing about there being temples there in Cameroon. And so this is a real blessing that we're holding on to. We expect to see that growth there. You can't tell the story of Cameroon's church history without talking about Gervais Zhang, who is a friend of ours. He was baptized in France in 1989 as he was getting his dental degree, ran into some missionaries there. He's really happy to say that he was ordained to the priesthood by Elder Anderson, or President Anderson at the time, Neil Anderson. But he went back to Cameroon early 90s and didn't know the church existed. He started up the church where he became branch president. Maybe this is before so he found the church that they had this Yaoundé mission, and he was the one who found out that it wasn't officially chartered, and found out that the lawyer who was supposed to be helping the church was just collecting monthly money, and there wasn't really the blockage that they had said it was. And he took the charter, and he felt led by the Spirit. He told us this story, and he would just walk in the government office, and he just knocked on the doors, not knowing in advance. He talked about it being like Nephi. Finally found the right government leader who said, "Oh no, I'm not blocking it. Talk to this person," and they got it signed. And so we had this in September of 1993, our official church recognition. And this is the document we use all the time to prove that we exist. But by that time, the mission had left. But and so they've been praying for the mission to come back for 27 years. And then it did in 2020. So we got there, and there were church buildings. Here's an example of one. I think this is the one in Bastos. So you can kind of get a sense that there may be some safety issues here. Here's another one in Douala. But these buildings, the church only had one building that they owned. And
in Cameroon.
Yeah, in Cameroon.
Or any of our countries, really.
So we had this terrain, this land, but they hadn't built upon it. That was the only one that we had, right? And they said they were going to finish building it before we left, and we tried to hold it to them. But we think that it might be built by now. Anyway, people would break in, and this was a picture of some of the thieves, showing that wickedness never was happiness. But sometimes the break-ins would be an inside job too, because people are just so poor, and they'll steal the chairs. Air conditioning units, just little things. But it's
plastic lawn chairs.
Yeah,
things like
everyone
that.
sits on.
So life is very hard, right?
This was, I think, with the first font that we saw. We got to do a baptism, and so we
worked on getting some new baptismal fonts that were built out of block and tile that were small in size. If you had to manually fill it up, it was possible. So.
But with that, we had some great members. This is a branch president in Douala. He has a great story. His wife is awesome. She was teaching seminary. This is their child. Of course, we don't have the laws about not carrying a baby.
Their brand new baby.
But they are a great couple. Their son went on a mission and is awesome. This was us in Gabon. We
finally made it. Yeah.
This was the branch president there. He became a branch president later. She got baptized. So really great members. And then here is that's Stefan Bogie and his wife who got baptized later. And he was my counselor in Gabon, basically ran the church there in Gabon for us. But he is awesome. He really helped us out a lot.
He has an interesting story because he is half Ivoirian and half Gabonese. And he grew up in the Ivory Coast, just very, very poor. And he was able to go on a mission and was sent to the Democratic Republic of Congo, but also it also covered our areas as well. But anyway, he was a young missionary there. At the end of his mission leaders suggested that he go to Gabon, the home of his mother's family, because Ivory Coast, do you remember when Ivory Coast was having a lot of bloodshed, a lot of violence and killing and horrible things going on in like 2012, I think. And so he actually went to Gabon with nothing. He had family members, but they offered him a bed to sleep on. And he exercised great faith. He learned on his mission to work hard and to be honest. And he went home or he went to Gabon and just got a job washing dishes, trying to do his very best. And a woman saw him in this restaurant when he was clearing dishes, and she just would watch him and noticed that and decided he was a responsible young man. And so she she said, I don't have a job for you, but I'd love for you to come to my office and you can do errands for me, things like that. And so while he was there in her office, he would take the time to read the newspaper. And he saw that there was a contest for, which is usually how you will get a job. They'll just pitch you, make exams, and then whoever does the best wins the job, basically, out of thousands of people often who will apply for jobs. So
And that's in Gabon where there's more
Yeah,
meritocracy. Other
right.
places, it's if you attach a 20 with your resume, you might get it seen.
Right. But so he applied for, he took this test and he came in the top, I don't know, 10 or something like that. And then there was a round 2 test and it was a lot of math and things like that. And he tried to study really hard and he came in second. And so he and this other person got a job working for Total Energies, you know, the French gas company. And it has changed his life. It's changed his life. He's the only truly self-reliant person in the church in Gabon and pretty near the same thing in Cameroon. And he is able to serve and help so many people.
Mhm.
He helps so many people. And he's 34. And he's started all these other businesses. He's tried to do projects that will help the other members become more self-reliant. He is just amazing, amazing.
And just a quick fast forward, after she got baptized, or a year later or so, it was in January, they came and visited us and got sealed in the temple there in Utah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna do a quick discussion about our missionaries. We have lots of photos there. There was only 14 missionaries when we started. Again, this was COVID. All the Americans have been sent home.
And some Africans.
And some Africans. And that they think is that some weren't sent home because again, more funny business. Some member didn't want missionaries to leave, so he ended up scuttling the plane, and so they had to stay.
He had government connections.
Yeah, so they were kind of shell shocked by the time we had gotten there because they had no mission president in the country. The mission president was in Brazzaville at the time, waiting for us to show up, and they were there with these new smartphones they just inherited. So, but very still good missionaries. Pie charts. A quarter of our missionaries were from North America, but 75% are from Africa, essentially. And half of those are from the DRC. The Democratic Republic of Congo is just growing by leaps and bounds, and they're just generating tons of missionaries, and there's not enough places for them. So we received a lot. We were telling the missionary department, we need to have a multiplicity of cultures, because anytime you get a dominant culture, then it starts doing weird things in the mission. But it was really hard because there's just so many missionaries, and they'd come out and they may have been baptized for a year or two, and maybe they've been trained and maybe they haven't, but it was interesting. We didn't have any sisters beforehand, but they started sending us sisters. We could handle about 16, 4 different apartments of 4 just for safety reasons, and they were all African sisters. So what was that number? About 18% sisters. And then about a third of them spoke English, especially more towards the end. We'd get the Americans, but we also had some others from Ghana and Nigeria. So that was some of the first missionaries that we had. They were great. More photos here during the rain. This is Elder Mukama. You just do what you need to do. You just take your shoes off. You walk through for the rain.
But believe me, I gave lectures after that. That was on our, at our zone conferences. You always have to have shoes on because you saw what the streets looked like and they're live. I mean, there's glass, there's metal, there's just all sorts of things. And really, we just said, please just wait for the water to go down. We don't care if you're late.
And Andrea was basically the mission medicine woman. Like she was the first point of contact whenever there was a problem. So she knew what she was speaking about when they'd have cuts and things. You know, more flooding and just the missionaries having a good time.
These are the two first sister missionaries to serve in Cameroon in our mission. So, and the sister on the left, she is Cameroonian, and the one on the right is also from Cameroon, but was called to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, but because of visa things, she couldn't get there. They were absolute rock stars.
Yeah, they were the best.
Mm-hmm. These
More
are just more sister missionaries with us. And then just some pictures of our missionaries. You see them. This was.
So we couldn't get any of the Americans in, and they were all on visa delay because Cameroon wouldn't let them in. But we got the idea that if we could send our missionaries into Gabon, they could establish residency and then come in from Gabon as Gabon residents into Cameroon, and they had an agreement. So that was our kind of end around. And it worked because our person helping us out with travel was in the same village as the person who worked in Gabon's consulate. Again, more connections. But at the end of February, we were able to get these 7 American missionaries into Gabon, and they were the only missionaries there who'd been there for over a year.
Because
And
all the missionaries had
moved
been
out.
evacuated out of.
And their
out of
French
Gabon.
was really rusty. And so they just, they were great missionaries, but they just had to pair
didn't
with
speak French.
members that didn't speak French. But they were awesome. They were happy to be together. And then we started setting up assistants and things. These are our first 2 assistants, and they're lovely. More missionaries. We would usually pair, in fact, almost always, if we could, an American with an African. Having 2 white people going around, white shirts and ties, was not a safe thing. So that was Alulu Cow, another Clausen.
These are just more missionaries that you won't know. I mean, just the one on the right, he was also an assistant from DR Congo. And, you know, he started feeling very overwhelmed at the end of his mission because he was going home. And we had taught a lot about the value of education. We encouraged everybody who didn't speak English to learn English because we knew when they went home, the data told us that they would earn 30 to 50% more income from if they were fluent in English. And so it would also prepare them to be able to start the church's BYU Pathway program, the Pathway Connect year, when they went home. And he was just feeling so overwhelmed because he has like 8 half siblings who he knew he wanted to put through school. And before his mission, he's like a high school graduate. He worked at a school, taught 5th grade before his mission. And with that salary, he would pay for one of these siblings to go to school. But there's such a culture of sharing and of feeling responsible for family members, very loose definition of who is family. Everybody's my sister or my brother, right? And so there's just a lot of pressure, and it's pretty tricky. It's pretty tricky, but these people, and this is a sister from the Ivory Coast who had grown up, who had been born in one of those very violent parts of the Ivory Coast, and her family heard about the church. Her dad decided to move the family into the city. So she learned to try and speak French and go to the French schools in one of these bigger cities in Ivory Coast when she was 14. And so when she got to us, she was not literate, you know, in French, but she learned. She learned. We had a lot of missionaries who would speak a tribal language, and then something happened. Either they couldn't afford to go to elementary school and high school, or something happened, and where the primary languages were French. And so we would receive often missionaries who couldn't read French. And so one huge accomplishment was that we had missionaries who became literate, who could at least literate to the point of reading and speaking French, which will help them.
We started out with the Book of Mormon.
And English too, you know, and some English, right? So.
Fun fact, everyone in her village was born on the same day is named the same first name. The girls all have a name for Monday and a name for Tuesday, etc.
It's more missionary.
more missionaries. They really developed relationships. We loved all these missionaries and they loved each other. We started out with a 14, but we had a 50 missionary complement and we moved to 80. And by the time we were done, we had 100 missionaries at once. This is a picture during one of our zone conferences in our office. And when they'd go home, you could see the love that they had for each other. And we still maintain those relationships. Talk a little bit about the food and the culture. This was, I think, one of our first shopping experiences. They do have some French grocery stores there because of the former French influence, but it's not always the same as going to Costco.
But
they-
fruit is plentiful, though.
Yes, and these caterpillars, they seem to like those, and I just took pictures. You could scoop them up. Of course, because it was French, maybe they've got escargot, local living ones. I didn't do that either.
Is
wanna
this
talk about this?
fufu? You all know, a lot of you know about fufu. It's a starchy
Just in a pound.
powder, manioc, flour, and corn. Sometimes there's a lot of regional pride. Your fufu recipe is really like people can come to blows over the fufu recipe.
We had some Congolese who said they needed to eat fufu breakfast, lunch, dinner. That was the only way I could survive because that's how I grew up and that's how my body needs it. So we tried to have them have a little diversity. But our missionaries learned how to gut fish. And
So this is something that they would do. The missionaries just go walk around and look for people to talk to and start
Yes, sir.
conversations with them. And this person, a way of earning money, they would go to some fish marketplace and just buy huge sacks of little fish. And then they gut them and then they walk around, and try and sell them. So the missionary was helping that day and they provided him like an apron type of thing. So.
I don't know if you can see that, but again, he's got a wheelbarrow, a basket with chickens. And so he's just walking through selling chickens. You see the guy behind him, he's got a bucket. He may be having beignets or like little donuts on his head and just selling those.
I mean, it is amazing, right? To see the creativity and the genius,
Or
that-
since Cameroon, they say people don't go hungry in Cameroon because they've done a great job with the agriculture. They'll go off into the villages and they'll go into their banana crops and they'll bring them all in. Of course, they'll load up their cars in just incredible ways with whatever these onions and things, and they'll just sell those at the market.
So lots of informal economy, people walking around selling things outside, which I think is probably one big reason why COVID did not really wipe out everybody. So that's one reason. Most also people, the average age is 18 years old and people would die by 60, right? And so there just weren't those populations. And then people would die. More dangerous was malaria or typhoid. And occasionally they'd have cholera outbreaks in our cities too. So COVID really wasn't a big deal to them at all. And people didn't, they didn't think it existed, or there were a lot of conspiracy theories, all sorts of things like
Yeah,
that.
that's something we didn't get into, the whole what is true, because there's no real news outlets. It's all through word of mouth on WhatsApp. So it's really hard. And so just by us reading like the Mayo Clinic pages and say, well, actually, if you did this, that was hard. But we try to educate. These are just people, these are kids outside the grocery store. People will, as I mentioned, put out a sheet, just sell shoes or sell whatever they had. I like it how that would come to you. It's like the impulse aisle, like when you're walking out. Here, they just walk up to you and, I have a whole bunch of photos. This is
Super impressive.
This is the pillow guy. You might need something like that. Wheelbarrows, mango season. So now we get to the fun stuff because Medicine Woman has a lot of photos here. So
I didn't see that. That's funny. So I was really just the gatekeeper for the medical things, but it turned out that I learned a lot. We had an area medical advisor who we would Zoom call with if I had questions about, or I would try, one of my jobs was to try and find clinics and hospitals, both for mental health and just, body health types of things, where we could take the missionaries. And so we'd go on outings looking. Sometimes the area medical advisor would travel and go with me, and we would try and make relationships. This was a clinic that was run by our district president. He actually was a doctor, did more lab analysis, but he also did physicals for people. And this was just one of our sisters got ill. Too long of a story, but
I like this because you see how important it is that, Andrea's there consulting and consoling and helping these missionaries. who many times don't have a mother or don't have adults who would take care of them. And Andrew would provide advice on their health and what they needed to do, and tell them they need to drink 3 liters of water, they need to wash their fruit and all this. And they hadn't had this kind of care before. We had this one sister, this was that great, one of the Cameroonian sisters. She got COVID, and of course, these are early days, people don't know what to do with it. And the protocol was that they need to put them in a hospital, and we couldn't go and visit her. We call it the hospital prison. And so they put her in a wheelchair, and we had to provide water for her, at least when she got there. And then they sprayed her down with this liquid, whatever that did. But we didn't see her for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And so we would just talk with her on WhatsApp, and we only had this other sister missionary. So we had to find some other sister to pair her with. But luckily, because she's an awesome sister, she started talking to people about the Book of Mormon inside the hospital.
And then she'd get on the phone and they would teach lessons over WhatsApp on a 3-way call to people. So she just really found great ways to manage things. But it was very complicated because we had one Christmas, there was just tons of COVID and it was going through the mission. And so in our other city, we had a 5-star, what our doctor would call a 5-star African hospital. And, so we sent the missionaries there to get them tested because the church had all this protocol for us to follow if a missionary was tested positive. But they came home, they all had been to the same clinic and they all came home with different prescriptions. Some of them came home with just drink water and rest and take some Tylenol equivalent. But others came home with prescriptions for 6, 2 antibiotics. And then some of those crazy things that, you were talking about, they came home with all different pieces of advice. And so that sort of added to the complication. That was sort of the level of healthcare that we were able to access. And so it made it really important that I had a procedure established so that anytime anybody, they would have to ask to go to the doctor, and I would tell them where to go. They couldn't go on their own because, of course, you have to pay before you get any services. So then they'd go to the doctor and I say, when you finish, you need to know what they told you to do, and you need to take pictures. If they write you a prescription, take a picture and send it to me. And then I would approve whether they could purchase the medicines or not, because we've had some situations where, black box medicines would be prescribed. So it's things that we don't ever use anywhere else in the world, but we're still being prescribed, and they kill your liver, for example, these antifungals, for example. So I learned quite a bit.
Sometimes they saw the missionaries as a walking checkbook, and they would write them a bunch of prescriptions because they knew that church would pay. You can describe this one too.
So a lot of the African missionaries we had would have stomach issues because they'd had dirty water their whole life and dirty food their whole life. It's very common for them to take deworming pills, once a quarter if they came from any means at all or had any sort of, and sometimes they'd want to take them even if maybe they didn't need them, but they just would think that would help them. And so this is just a picture. I said, okay, you can buy that box, and kind of jokingly, I said, okay, well, let me know if anything comes out. And this missionary said, it's not beautiful to see. Do you see his little emoji down there? But I must tell you, I must show you that it's a worm.
An amoeba.
It just came out, and so he took a picture of it and sent it to me. So I put that there. It is a little bit gross, but it's the total reality of life, right? And one of the other things that I learned a lot about were gastric ulcers. And so they would be these young missionaries who are 20, and they already have advanced gastric ulcers, which they can bleed and you can die. This contributes to a high mortality rate. So we did a lot of Nexium. You all hear those commercials around. So I dealt a lot with that.
We'll go through quickly.
Boils under the arms, or things, just bizarrely swollen knees. We had missionaries who would show up just with mouthfuls of terrible teeth. And
one of who became assistant, he showed up and he had missing a front teeth, kind of like Leon Spinks. And because Dr. Gervais Zhang, who was still there, was a dentist, he would fix it and just
his specialty. He actually had a school for teaching how to make prosthetics, low cost prosthetics.
It was great.
And and it just changed
We had
everything.
one missionary who would never smile because he was missing teeth, and then we were able to get the teeth back, and he started talking and smiling.
Yeah.
It was great.
This is just an example of what missionaries would come home from if we didn't put a gatekeeper up there, just all sorts of random medicine. COVID shots finally
We
came
told them everyone needs to get vaccinated, and they do not like getting vaccinated.
for good reason. There's
Probably
vaccine
maybe not used to it.
skepticism.
Yeah, so it was. They got pictures.
They took pictures. We did not take the pictures.
No, they all shared them.
This was a missionary who got sick. This is an example of a hospital room where we were cared for the best, we could. Anytime anybody who's not from Africa shows up there at a clinic or hospital with a fever, you're instantly put on anti-malarial medications, whether you need it or not, because that can go south really quickly. He recovered very well. We just saw him last week. Just things like nail funguses, rashes, just, I know, sorry,
advise-
go fast.
Okay.
The-
We actually had two missionaries that were hit. They weren't sure by what. Okay, all the missionaries need to be home by dark. These missionaries were out after dark, crossing a big road, and they got hit maybe by a car, I think by a motorcycle probably.
I think like a motorcycle mirror, but they both woke
They
up
flipped up and then they didn't.
and they lost
weren't aware.
consciousness.
Yeah. I got a call like 3 rings in a row. So I finally answered because I was in an interview and he's like, I'm on the back of a motorcycle because there's no ambulances. So he's holding on after being hit by a car or something. And he's like, I don't know where my companion is. I'm like, where are you going? He's like, I don't know. And so when he shows up at the hospital and
It's a clinic, yeah.
yeah, it was a clinic.
A neighborhood.
Yeah. And
Deep in a neighborhood.
anyway, we find him. Luckily we were in town and we went and visited him. There's a whole series of photos that we're not going to show here, but it was really sad. The lady was just trying to stitch him up. And they weren't doing any kind of like checking your eyes or internal bleeding. They were just trying to stop any bleeding. But I took a picture. I had to leave because it was too gross. But that's there's iodine, there's hydrogen peroxide or something. But this is kind of the level, at least of this clinic. We took him to a better clinic.
So, but the point being that the woman who sewed him up, and it did take 3 hours to do about 6 stitches here, but the woman who sewed him up did an impeccable job with the equipment that she had, which was, dull needles and all that kind of stuff, and using industrial bleach to clean the area. But she did a great job and she sewed him up here, no scar, no nothing, and then we took him to the 5-star hospital and had everybody's organs checked and brain scans done and all that kind of stuff. But most people don't, again, have that. And most people, it was a miracle that they got picked up, put on the back of these motorcycles, because nobody will ever do that for you, because you have to pay for the motorcycle before you get on the motorcycle. And then the person, whoever got them there, somebody offered and paid for the missionary who was injured more, who needed all the stitches. They paid in advance for him to start being treated before we even got there. These are miracles. These things never would happen. And so it's just little things like that where we just know that the Lord is there with us and with the missionaries too. So these are just examples of a lot of medicine that are used, anti-malarial. If you didn't come from a malarial zone, you would take just super low dose of doxycycline every day to kill any potential stuff. A lot of stomach medicines. And if the Africans started feeling like they were getting malaria, we just start them on those medicines.
So we'll talk just briefly about this dental project. It kind of relates to medical. We were looking for some kind of community service that we could do. And because this Dr. Zhang was a dentist, we thought, hey, we could bring in some dentists. Actually, this was Andrea's idea.
Well, he talked to us about it. I would really love to have a dental project here,
So we could offer that to the community. And so there was someone from my mission and some other, people that we knew, and they came out to serve the community as a dental project in the last month of our mission. That's us with Dr. Zhang as we're waiting for some of the dentists to show up. We have a big banner. We are announcing it to the community that they come in. They basically have to pay like $1.80 to get in, just to have some skin in the game. But we were providing them free, essentially, dental care that they hadn't had. Most people, what was it, like?
You want to guess the percentage of people who've ever been to a dentist in Cameroon?
It was 3.
3%. 3%.
So these were the dentists that came over. So, Andrew was there helping with the missionaries as they were sorting out all the equipment that got donated. These were some of the prosthetics that Dr. Zhang and his team were building. But these other doctors were doing really expert level. In fact, Dr. Zhang was like, they're doing too high of a level, like they need to go through faster. And some of, like, we had little small needles and things, and they weren't used to that care. But people were very nervous. As you can see, if you're a small child, you've never been to a dentist, you have these two big white people who are going to go into your mouth. But we did what we could. We didn't really have the equipment, so he was on a stool, but great things happened. People were very happy with the care that they were getting. This is one of our branch presidents. They pulled out something very big from his mouth, but it was good. People were happy. This is another friend of mine from France, and it was a really great event, and we had a.
So we were just able to do care for about 1,000 people in 4 days, and it was a huge service to the community. Some people had multiple services done, but about 1,000 people. So
we just wanted to end with just some of the miracles. We're not trying to dissuade you. We kind of worry that some of these things might scare you, but we are seeing miracles every day, as I was mentioning in the talk. Your faith grows in God because you need that, and you see his hand in your life. Here's an example. This is Elder Mpesa. I interviewed him for a mission, and he came early with all the infrastructure problems. He shows up early. He's reading the scriptures to be there on time. He gets called on a mission to the DRC. We found out the night before when I sent him apart, he had no way to get to the airport, which is about an hour away, and his parents wanted to go with him.
he'd never been to the airport.
Yeah, none of them had never been on an airplane, and only the dad had seen the airport before. And so we picked them up, we explained them how to use the seatbelts because we wanted no one else to wear seatbelts. Explain how to use the seatbelts, and we drive the hour out to the airport. And meanwhile, the dad's talking about how he was waking up at 5 a.m. to pray, looking for a church. He wasn't even a member of any church. And then our church ended up getting established right across the street. And so he wanders in, and he was welcomed. It was a great way. This is also a nice reminder, welcoming new people who come in. He felt very welcomed, and he decides to be baptized. Of course, his wife says, that's crazy, and I don't want anything to do with it. There's a lot of rumors about the Book of Mormon. She didn't want to touch it, but then she had a dream, which was another interesting story where it was shown to her that this was an important book. So she starts reading the Book of Mormon. She gets convinced, and now their family has this missionary. He's already since come back, but they are a very solid family. So we're very happy for the Pesa family.
This is Monique. For those of you who are at our sacrament meeting today, I just told her story about her and how she found the Book of Mormon and learned more about Jesus there, and how she could be healed because of Jesus's atonement. And she already knew the Bible very well, but she came to really value the unique spirit that comes with the Book of Mormon. So, and that's her baptism. She's in the center in the short sleeve polo shirt.
And that's Brother Francois that I talked about too, who really wasn't interested in the church until he read the Book of Mormon, and then felt the convincing power of it, decided to be baptized because it helped lead him to Jesus.
I just love this picture. Do you see this is more fabric? Do you see the logo in the center? That's the Charity Never Faileth, but it's a French version. And so every year, to commemorate the founding of the Relief Society, the women create a new fabric and they make dresses. And these are just some pillars of tremendous strength in Yaoundé, who have really put into practice the gospel principles. These people they don't have easy lives, but look how they glow because of their faith in God and the miracles that they've experienced in their lives. This is just the mother of the current district president and the grandmother of our Cameroonian sister missionary. And I loved going to her Relief Society. She was the Relief Society president. And every time we were there together, it was a time of instruction with love and directness. And she really was just raising a whole group of strong women, and was so compassionate and so completely brilliant in the way she testified of Jesus. Yeah. This is just another woman who I loved, who told me a great story, and we won't talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
This was someone early in our mission. So since there's not really a post office, everything gets sent through DHL or maybe FedEx. And we had a call, an angry call from someone from DHL said, I've come by your office 4 times. You're not there. You got to go pick it up, from our central office. He was kind of, then he hung up. And so I called back, said, well, we travel a lot and you didn't call me 4 times and we didn't know. And so finally convinced him to come back and come by the office again to deliver maybe some important books or whatever. And then we start talking to him. He starts looking at our name tag and we have a good conversation. He says, well, you're a member of this church? Do you know an Elder Badger? And it was a senior missionary from about 10 years ago that had taken him in and was giving him such wise counsel. He saw him as a father and he wanted to know what was happening to Elder Badger. And so we talked to him and we built a friendship. He told us his name was Samson. We gave him all our information. And then he starts telling us, well, I'm just delivering some stuff to the U.S. Embassy. I think that the DNA kits and so he gives us more information. But he becomes a friend of ours just, I think, through the
work of the Badgers.
Of the
10
Badgers.
years
Yeah,
ago.
it's a senior couple.
Yeah.
Oh, and this was that person I was talking about who was doing drugs behind his brickmaking. For those who weren't there, he was kicked out of his home. Finally, ends working for a brickmaker, smoking pot. Missionaries find him. Anyway, he gets baptized because of the Book of Mormon, because he reads the Book of Mormon and feels closer to Jesus. He gets baptized, and this is during his temple recommend interview. And I didn't know his whole backstory, but then he goes to Kinshasa to be endowed, and he meets up with that missionary who had baptized him. So just great stories and great miracles. And this was that family that I went to, Sister Mary, who was the Anglophone. This was their house. This is a courtyard. There's lots of people living in there. It's a big concrete area. This was the bucket of green stuff that we were going to eat. And they also, you can see it's a tire, like a drum. And this is where they cook their food. And then, so we were inside and they made it outside. There's a little fire brewing. And this was her and at least a few kids. This was someone from the district that I was with. And then they came later, about a year later, to the district. And it's such a happy, smiley family. You would think they have nothing, but they have the gospel. They're obedient and they're blessed. If you keep the commandments, you'll prosper in the land. And they're examples of this. And this is Sister Lopez. She got approved to go on a mission, and she's currently serving, and she's doing great.
Oh, and there's a set of twins there, and they found the church, I guess, on their own. I'm not sure really how they found it.
Their friends were going.
Their friends. Their father really objected to them going to church and would abuse them physically after they would come home from church. And
sneak out and go to church.
Yeah, they would sneak out and go to church. But anyway, the father ended up dying, and they continued coming to church, and they are just so diligent. Yeah.
I had interviewed these two, the twins, for this one, to go on a mission, and they had Book of Mormons that were all marked up. They had read it like 3 or 4 times.
The first time when they were still 17, right? They were 17.
They were young.
They were too young to even.
Yeah, they were a couple of years young, but anyway, they're currently serving missions too. Part of our goal was to help the young go on missions because they were planting seeds for later to come back to be serviceable in the church. Here is a young man who came back from a mission. He ended up working in our office.
Just volunteer.
As a volunteer. He was very helpful. He became a branch president. He got married, and I don't know if they've gone to the temple yet, but they're
Yes, they did.
An awesome couple.
Mm-hmm.
That is the district president in Yaoundé. This is his happy son. He has his own peanut butter business, but just another example of a great family. He served a mission when he was young. He was dutiful, and he's serving the church. I mean, things are hard, but you can see the blessed state of those who keep the commandments. They're blessed in all things. So that now we're at the end here. This is, you can see we don't have the tags on. As we were done, as we handed it off, this was our last day in Cameroon. I was actually nervous about not having our tag on because that had saved us so many times when we get pulled over.
Or in the airport. There are about 12 possible places where you could get stopped and have a problem.
So, well, anyway, we get to the airport and not wearing our tags. And this lady who works at the airport just kind of.
She'd kind of been eyeing me downstairs when we checked in our suitcases. And I would smile at her, and then we get up to the gate and she found us at the gate. And she said, I just wanted to meet you. Who are you people? Who are you people?
You could tell that we were people of God, she said. And it was such a blessing that we didn't need to have the badge on our chests to be good or to have the Spirit with us and to make connections with people. And so that was a real blessing, and we've been keeping up with her on WhatsApp. And then finally, post-mission, with BYU Pathway, I was traveling, and this was in the Lomé Airport in Togo. And we were getting to our new gate, and I see this woman who was all alone, and this was Sister Charlotte. She was someone who was from the DRC, who moved to Gabon, and they didn't have her records. And so she was in the church for a long time, but she never had a record, so she couldn't officially out a calling. But more importantly, she couldn't get a temple recommend because there were no records of her, and the clerk couldn't find her. So, not that I have the tech skills, but I was able to sit down on the clerk's computer and do some searches and actually bring her record in. And she was so happy, so she could officially have a calling. And I did temple recommend interview for her. And this was her finally being able to go to a temple. She shows up in Lomé not knowing anybody, and she was very nervous about traveling to the temple by herself. And then I see her right there in the airport. So we saw that as another tender mercy. So these are just some of the photos that we have. But
I think,
conclusion.
I'll just share my testimony of the hand of God in our lives. And we don't have to be far to experience these same miracles, right? President Nelson has given us all that invitation to study about miracles, pray about miracles. And whether we're in Cameroon or Gabon or here, we can have a life filled with great joy, feel the power of God in our everyday lives. And yes, this was an awesome experience. And I look forward to having more awesome experiences, as we get older. I think I just have felt really blessed to have been and learned from all these people. It was one of the great blessings of my life to sit in a Relief Society where women would read a line from a general conference talk. The teacher would read 3 lines, and the teacher would say, who could testify of this? Who could testify about something that we just read, a principle of the gospel that was stated in a talk? And then, a woman would raise her hand and she would share her understanding, her personal experience of how this gospel principle had blessed her. And that went on and on during the whole hour of a Relief Society. Life can be simple. The gospel teachings can be simple. They can be so powerful. I remember leaving that particular lesson feeling so close to the women in that room. And it wasn't just the people who had the testimonies of these gospel principles who were sharing them. Women who came into that meeting totally broken in horrible situations were there, but were comfortable enough to ask questions and to raise their concerns and share it. And then they were in this great sisterhood of women surrounded by women who would encourage them and testify of how the Book of Mormon helped them, or how following a certain commandment really gave them peace in a very turbulent world. So that's a little bit of my great joy serving this mission, and doing it with Todd was also awesome. I got to have the companion of my choice. So.
We definitely grew closer. You either get closer or you get farther apart, but it really helped. We were a partnership, and we do feel that we were prepared for this and to be able to serve together. We feel blessed by it. It was great for me to see the gospel of Jesus Christ in action, and that it applies to everybody in whatever situation you might be in, that the Lord knows and loves these people. The Lord knows and loves us. And as we keep his commandments, as we try to be like Jesus, he blesses us. That's his promise to us. As we keep the commandments, we do prosper in the land. Prosper may not mean a big house and a big car, but we have that peace and that joy that radiates from us. I saw that in many different faces. I also learned even more so about the converting power of the Book of Mormon, because it testifies of Christ. And as people read it every day and study it, they make better decisions every day, as President Nelson said. So it strengthened my testimony to see the hand of the Lord in my life and in the lives of the people that we served. And we think it's a great opportunity for anybody who may even be considering a mission, whether it's in Africa, whether it's local, to go and serve, because it's the best way to bring joy to them, to bring joy to your own life. It's a great way to become more like Jesus. And that's my testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.